Hi everyone, Heather here with astrologywithheather.com, and today I am back with a special video. And we're going to be talking about the lunar nodes, the North and South Node, or Rahu and Ketu in Vedic astrology, and what they mean in your birth chart, what they represent, and how to maybe navigate the energy if possible, because the North and South Nodes do represent these sort of faded points in our chart where sometimes it feels like when they're activated, things are a little bit beyond our control. So we're going to get into all of that. So this is going to be a video where I kind of go into the general energy of the North and South nodes, and then because the nodes do run on an axis, so they run in opposition to one another in the astrology, I'm going to talk about a little bit about each axis in the houses. And so if you can find your birth placement and your natal positions of the North and South node, you'll get a little extra energy at the end. And the reason I'm doing this is because it was one of the most requested videos that I got requests for when I asked you guys what types of videos you wanted to see in terms of tutorials in the future. And today the nodes are super active. I'm recording this on the 13th of July, and Mars and Saturn are both activating the North and South nodes right now. And so it is a very karmic day, and the nodes and the eclipses are being really heavily activated as I'm recording this. And in addition to this, I'm actually preparing a lecture on the nodes for my foundational astrology course. And so I figured, while I have everything together here and while I have my thoughts like all together, why not record a abbreviated version of that for all of you guys to enjoy? So that's what we're doing here. And so, there's plenty to learn about the North and South Node. There are a lot of different interpretations, especially if you're looking at Western versus more traditional forms of astrology and the meanings behind the North and South Nodes. But I'm coming from a Western astrological perspective on this, a modern Western astrological perspective primarily, and then I do incorporate some of the Vedic interpretations and some additional interpretations based on my experience and other people's writings and things like that. So this is what I have found to work best, and what in my experience makes the most sense when it comes to the North and South Node. And so first and foremost, what are the nodes? Because they're not planets, they're not like bodies in space. They're calculations, so they're actually mathematical equations. So it's showing essentially where the eclipse points are. So when we have the sun and the moon in a conjunction with the North and South nodes, either in opposition, the moon and the sun in opposition in a full moon, or in conjunction in a new moon, within a certain orb, I believe it's about 15 to 17 degrees in a conjunction with the North or the South node, or both, that's when we have the eclipses. And so these are calculations for when the eclipses will be activated by the sun and moon during either the new moon or the full moon. And so they're not actual bodies in space. And so that's part of what they're representing, are these eclipse points. And so to really understand the North and South nodes fully and completely, you really need to understand what the eclipses represent. And I'm going to get into this even more in depth in a second video. I'm going to do a series of 3 videos about eclipses and the nodes, since we're entering into eclipse season right now, and you guys were very interested in these things. And it's something that I myself am very interested in. And so I will be doing multiple videos on this topic, and we'll get deeper into what the eclipses mean in the birth chart and in general. But just an abridged version of this, eclipses are when the sun and the moon are exact by degree and declination in a conjunction. And so the sun is either overpowering the moon, or the moon is overpowering the sun. So the moon is either going in front of the sun, passing in front of the sun, literally in a solar eclipse, which is the conjunction between the sun and moon, or in opposition to the sun, with the moon in opposition to the sun. The shadow of the sun, or actually the shadow of the earth, is being cast onto the moon from the sun, because we have literally the sun right here, and then we have the earth. Let's pretend the mic is the earth. So we have sun, earth, moon, and so the sun is shining light onto the earth, and it's casting a shadow onto the moon, because they're in exact opposition with the earth right in the center. And so that's what a lunar eclipse or a blood moon is. And so the eclipses historically have been associated with turbulence and very faded karmic transition points where we see even nowadays physiological impacts of the eclipses in the way of strange weather patterns, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, things of that nature. And so, back thousands of years ago, when people were really observing these things and looking for these patterns in order to predict what was going to be happening, very much on a physiological level, on a physical level, when it comes to like planting and harvesting and strange weather events and things that could potentially be dangerous or life-threatening that could be coming about from these eclipses, they also noticed that they have an impact on people's individual lives and an impact on our behaviors and the choices that we're making. And so you'll see that people during times of eclipses, or around the times of the eclipses, might be making a lot of changes or going through a lot of really intense activity. They might be experiencing more stress. They might be moving in a new direction. They might have some sort of karmic energy coming up in their lives where fate is stepping in and guiding them in a new direction. And sometimes it can be quite uncomfortable. Eclipses a lot of times do bring really positive experiences for people, but on the flip side of that, sometimes they do bring things that can be really hard to deal with. And so eclipses, because they bring such change and such turbulence, they've been historically associated as like bad omens, blood moon, right? Blood on the moon is not a good omen. And having a solar eclipse, you're not supposed to look at it. It's like a time when you should be praying and all these kinds of things. Just based on the fact that people were observing by direct observation the effects of these eclipses and what they were doing, on a geological scale, in terms of weather patterns, but also they were seeing that, these are turning points, like really big turning points when it comes to the collective humanity, when it comes to social movements, when it comes to, the bigger picture of things, but also they would propel people into, fated territory that sometimes wasn't so nice to experience. But eclipses also bring really good energy. And so when we're looking at the north and south nodes as being calculations of the eclipses or the eclipse points, we're looking at an energy associated with fate, right? Because these are things that are beyond our control. When you're thinking about an eclipse being associated with like a tsunami or, more volcanic activity, that's something that very much is beyond our individual control, right? Those are like earth changes that are going on that impact us very greatly. And it's not something that we can really do anything about because it's beyond us. It's beyond our control, right? So thinking about it in that way. The same thing goes for the north and south nodes. They represent sort of fated points in our birth charts. And so they show us a lot of where fate is going to step in and where we're going to have these like areas of life where we can experience upheaval and turbulence, and where we might have these periods of intense change where everything in our life changes due to the energy of these north and south nodes being activated in our charts. And so, transits to the nodes or eclipses on the nodes, there are a lot of different things that we could look at here, but in general, when the nodes are activated in a certain way, which is something that's beyond the scope of this video, it represents times of potential turbulence or upheaval, where karma steps in, where things seem to manifest that are beyond our control, and that guides us in a new direction. So usually the end result of that is that we completely move into a whole new path in our lifetime, related to that energy or as a result of that energy. And so that's part of what the eclipses do in our chart. They show us where things might be a little bit beyond our control or beyond our understanding, and we have to kind of roll with the punches, and we have to sort of follow the signs and synchronicities and move with the energy as it presents itself, because we might not always have control over these areas of our lives as much as we feel like we might. And so that's something that you have to sort of contend with. The other thing that the north and south nodes represent are karma in past lifetimes and, into our current lifetime and where we're moving forward into. And so the idea behind this is that the South Node represents our past lifetime experience and what we've already mastered and accomplished and maybe overdone even in a previous lifetime. And so in this lifetime, we're moving away from that energy and we're moving into something different. We're moving into the exact polar opposite of the energy that we overdid or already mastered in our previous experience. And so it feels comfortable to us to dwell in the area of our south node because it's familiar. We've done it, right? We've been there, done that. It's like old news. And so it's something where we might have a little bit of a talent in that area, or it just might feel better because it's easier and it's more comfortable and it's not very scary because we kind of know what to expect on a subconscious level because we've already done this. But if we dwell in the area of our south node, if we focus too much energy on the past and on our comfort zones in this area, things tend to unravel. We tend to feel unsatisfied in that area if we focus too much energy on it, and it tends to bog us down and hold us back from moving forward in our life and in our life's path. When we look at the north node, but it also, by the way, it does bring those talents. So, looking at the south node can show you where you have some sort of talent or gift, or this prior knowledge that you come in with, and it's just kind of innate. It's not something that you're really developing, and you can utilize that. But the trick with the south node is that you can't utilize it for your own gain necessarily. You have to utilize it in a way where you're giving it up to something higher, or you're giving back to people. It can't be tied up with your identity or your ego, or else that's where you get this energy of things unraveling and not working for you, and it causes a lot of issues in your life. The north node is the south node is the dragon's tail, right? So that's what we're moving away from. The dragon's head is our direction, it's our orientation. And so when we're looking at Rahu, the north node, the dragon's head, we're looking at where we're moving into in this lifetime. But we don't have any instincts for it, right? The dragon's body is more of our instinctual self. It's how we perceive things through our senses beyond, the five senses and beyond our mind. It's sort of like our gut instincts. And but without that sort of ability to see things clearly or to understand things on a more logical level and to think things through in that way. Where we look at the dragon's head, it's more like where we're thinking about things, but we don't have the experience or we don't have the instincts to back it up. And so this is an area where we can feel really pulled or really drawn into this energy. Like we're really excited, we're really lit up, we really want to move forward in this new direction in our lives. And so it can even bring, especially if it's associated with a close conjunction to certain planets, obsession with certain concepts, certain energies, certain pathways in our lives where we're just really driven toward the energy of the north node. However, this is an area where we don't have instincts, where we haven't really, we don't have that sensory input, right? We're just thinking with our heads logically, but we don't have the experience to back it up. So we don't really know what we're doing. And so it's kind of like an area where people are sort of like toddlers in this area, where at first, earlier on in life, you kind of walk toward that area. It's like you're learning how to ride a bike and you're like a little child and you just got the training wheels off, and so you might just zoom really fast and then hit something, like hit a bump and fall on your face, or you might wobble to one side or the other, or you might be scared to even take off because you don't have your training wheels anymore and you don't know if it's going to work, right? And so that's sort of the energy of the north node. It's an area where we're learning how to navigate. We're learning how to do this. We're probably going to make some mistakes, and those mistakes can scare us out of the north node experience and cause us to want to fall back on our comfort zones, which is the south node area. And so there's usually a kind of an ambivalence and a little bit of this like excited fear that is associated with that north node energy. It's like, oh, I'm doing something new and it's exciting, but I'm scared because I don't know how this is going to turn out, and I don't have experience in this area in this lifetime, or in my past lifetimes I have no instincts for this, but I want to do it and I need to do it, right? So this is an area where people can overdo things and create a giant mess. They can kind of go off in the wrong direction. They can cause a lot of problems for themselves by going too hard, too fast into the north node. And then you have to sort of withdraw and retreat into the south node. And so when you have the north and south node on a certain axis, this represents an area where you're going to be kind of pushing and pulling between 2 points, between two different energies or sort of areas of life, where you might fall back to one side and then go back to the other side. And sort of the idea here is to eventually come to a space of balance, right? Where you're utilizing the energy of your past experience, you're utilizing your instincts, you're utilizing the gifts and talents you came in with without dwelling on it or trying to utilize that for personal gain. And you're moving forward and learning something new that you've never experienced in your past lifetimes. And you're embracing that, but you're doing it cautiously and in measured steps instead of just jumping all in and overshooting. So that's sort of that energy of the North and South Node in general, and how it's represented in the chart and how I interpret these things when I do readings for people. There is sort of another implication to the North and South Node that I thought was kind of interesting, because it is the dragon's head and the dragon's tail, and it's actually associated with this little guy up here. I apologize if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, but the Ouroboros. So it might be a little bit of a different pronunciation. I tried to find it online, and when you click on those little links that take you to like a YouTube video that shows you how to pronounce things, then there's 3 of them and they all pronounce them differently. That was the situation with the Ouroboros. So it might be a little off, but anyway, it's associated with this symbolism that is really inherent in Gnosticism and in a lot of different traditions, with this like reptile sort of energy and the dragon eating its own tail and this like continuous circle that goes on for infinity. And it's associated with karma, right? And this sort of these cycles and these patterns that we repeat over and over and over again into different lifetimes. And so another take on this, and something that I'm starting to think is a little bit more interesting to look at, is how the North and South Node might have to do with these repeating patterns that we're just sort of doing over and over and over again. And so breaking out of these patterns might be actually the best way to utilize this energy, or to work with this energy in our charts, breaking free from the entrapment of going back and forth between the North and South Nodes over and over again, and feeling like we're out of control and fate just leading us in circles where we're just doing the same thing and repeating the same patterns, right? So this could be an area that represents an opportunity to break free from like this karmic cycle and this sort of over and over again repeating patterns that we do carry with us throughout all of our lifetimes. And so it could help us, understanding our North and South Node can help us to move away from the entrapments of our past and our past karma. And yes, fate does play a role in our experience here, but, maybe we have a little bit of free will with this. Maybe we can work with this energy more consciously. I don't know. So it's just kind of something I thought was interesting, because this also came up in a video that Robert Phoenix did, where he talked about, it was 2 different people. I wish I should have looked up what this was before. But there was this guy, I think it was Jordan Peterson actually now. It might have been someone different. I'll have to look. But he was looking at someone's chart in present day versus someone's chart like in the past, and how there are all these connections, and these 2 people look exactly the same, and they had similar things that they were researching and getting into in both people's lives, and they look so similar. And their charts were really interesting, because like the original person who was born, a long time ago, who is no longer here on this planet, his North Node was conjunct, I think it was Jordan Peterson's South Node, and Jordan Peterson's South Node was conjunct this guy's North Node, and exact. And so it's kind of like they were bouncing back and forth between dealing with the same axis and dealing with these same patterns, just in different ways. And it made me think about the Ouroboros and how, maybe the North and South Node represents an entrapment. Maybe it represents this pattern that's repeating, and we think we're going in a new direction because we forgot, right? Or because the instincts aren't there, where something's cut off, right? Where our head is cut off from our body, our instincts and our sensory experience and our gut knowledge and our intuition is cut off from our logical minds, and our past experience is definitely cut off from our logical minds if you're looking at this in terms of reincarnation. And so we just keep going in these cycles. And so anyway, this is a little bit beside the point in terms of the practical applications for interpretation for the North and South nodes, but I did think it was worth mentioning just because it's something I've been pondering, and I wonder if any of you guys have any insight into those concepts and maybe how to work with that energy if that is the case, because I do think it's really interesting. And then you also look at the moon and how strange of an anomaly the moon itself is and the eclipses are. And, looking at the moon in terms of our unconscious repetitive behavioral patterns, and the moon being associated with the nodes because they're the lunar nodes. And you can go down a whole big rabbit hole with this. So anyway, if you guys have any insight about that whole thing, that whole rabbit hole, please do comment down below. I always love hearing from you guys, and I learn a lot from, just getting feedback and bouncing ideas off of other astrologers and students of astrology. So I just wanted to bring that out because it is something I've been pondering on. But so that's really my spiel about the nodes in general. And so let's kind of jump into the axes, like the houses where the nodes are placed in our chart. And I'm going to give you guys a very brief rundown of what these represent and what people can expect if they have the nodes on these axes. So we're going to start with the first house and the seventh house, and that one is actually really interesting. So people who have the north and south node on the first house and seventh house axis, they tend to have difficulties with relationships, although I've noticed that the north node in the seventh versus the south node does tend to be a little bit more problematic earlier on in life. And just to backtrack before we get into that fully, something I meant to mention and I forgot to state is that the north and south nodes come to maturity in your 40s. And so age 48 and age 42 are the maturation ages for the north and south nodes. And so by the time you're out of your 40s, you've learned how to do the dance, you've learned how to navigate this energy a little bit more effectively. So, about halfway through your life, you finally catch on and you learn how to not go too hard or to dwell in the past, and how to create that balance between those two energies and merge them a little bit more effectively. And so that is an important statement to make before I get into this first and seventh house axis, because the north node in the seventh house does bring potentially difficulties with relationships earlier on. There's an obsession that's associated with the north node, like I mentioned before. It's like your appetite is insatiable in this area because it's something that's really exciting and really new. And so there's like this insatiable need for relationship, and you feel really excited and really passionate and really drawn toward relationship when you have the north node in the seventh house. And, relationships for the north node in the seventh or the first have karmic implications. They're either going to be relationships that are bubbling up from your past lifetimes, where there's karma that needs to be carried out, especially with the south node in the seventh house. And, once that karma is completed, that relationship can sort of fall by the wayside. And so if you have the south node in the seventh house, it's very common to come into relationship that feels very comfortable and very familiar, but doesn't necessarily feel satisfying, because when the north node is in the first house, you gain more satisfaction by focusing on your personal development. You're focusing on you, your needs, your direction in life. And when you dwell too much on relationships, it's going to prevent you from moving forward into your own personal development. The opposite is the case with that seventh first house axis. If you have the north node in the seventh house, you're obsessed with being in relationship a lot of the times, or you have a lot of turbulence in relationship, and relationships can feel scary to you. You might have a lot of ups and downs and very strange, fated karmic occurrences. Relationships are the thing that really pull you in a whole new direction in life and change your path, change your orientation. It stems from that area of relationship, and that's not just romantic partnership, but it mostly is associated with romantic partnership. And so you'll have a lot of ups and downs and fated twists and turns in relationship if you have the north and south node on this first and seventh house axis. And it's a constant battle between the needs of yourself and the needs of others. The need to develop who you are and the need to, develop relationships. And so there's a merging of these two energies that needs to come about. And a lot of times people who have these nodal, this nodal axis, they tend to go through multiple really important, very karmic relationships before they find the right one. And this one's in a particularly interesting placement, because regardless of where the north and south node is on this axis, people who have this configuration, especially when it's conjunct the ascendant and descendant, so the first house cusp and the seventh house cusp, their lives tend to take on this like fated importance. Like they feel like they're being guided by fate. They feel like they're being guided by a certain purpose or a direction or an orientation. Like they don't have control over the path their life is taking, and they go through these periods of upheaval and change and transformation. It's kind of like being born under an eclipse energy, which is something I'm going to discuss in our next video, is what it means to be born under an eclipse and how that shows up in the chart. But, for the purpose of this video, it's kind of like going through these fated transitions and upheavals where these crazy situations come in and completely change your path and orientation in life. And a lot of these are tied into relationship. And then for the second and eighth house axis, you're going to be dealing with finance, right? The second house is the house of finance. The eighth house is debt, joint finances, inheritance, other people's money, taxes, and also power and control issues and deep-seated fears and insecurities and anxieties. The eighth house is the house of where we fear loss of control. It is the house where power struggles can come up. When we talk about things like taxes and inheritance and debt and things like that, this is like people holding money over other people's heads. This is where like the ugly side comes out when it comes to finance. And so there's a lot of dealing with very fated karmic circumstances and a lot of ups and downs and twists and turns and upheavals and changes in direction and orientation related to finance. Either your own finances or finances in general, and these occurrences come about in ways that feel very fated, and it feels like you don't have control over them. And a lot of times financial situations can propel you into a completely new path in your lifetime. So major changes can come about from that financial area, and so that's part of what's going on there too. In terms of the third and the ninth house, so this is an energy that's associated more with the mental plane. And so the third house is the house of ideas. It's the house of learning. It's like lower education in terms of like grade school through middle school through high school. Whereas the ninth house is higher education. It's the bigger picture. It's the broader perspective in life. Both of these areas are associated with both short and long distance travel, connections with people in foreign countries. And so there's kind of a push and a pull between dealing with the mundane day-to-day thought processes and dealing with the bigger picture and the broader perspective. And something that could be really exciting for somebody with the North Node in either house is this quest for knowledge. So people who have the North Node in the ninth house, they tend to be insatiable in their quest for knowledge and experience and knowledge gained through experience. And so they want to constantly learn and grow, and they're diving into all these different philosophical systems, and they're really exploring their mind and different forms of wisdom. On the opposite end, with the North Node in the third house, it can be an obsession with communication and gathering information, where it's a little bit more practical and rational in that regard. But there are a lot of changes that can come about, and big upheavals and transformations that come about through changes in your educational pursuits, changes in your mindset and your ideas and your life philosophies. And they come about in ways that are very strange and fated and karmic, and it's like beyond your control. And this could also bring a lot of very fated occurrences related to travel, related to your community, and related to connections with people in foreign countries as well. So a lot of major turning points in life could have to do with those themes, like certain fated connections that come up in your community, certain fated connections that come up, with foreign cultures or being in a foreign country even. And so that's part of the energy with the third and ninth house axis. And then you have the fourth and the 10th house. So this is the area of home and family versus work and career. And so you are going to be sort of kind of bouncing back and forth between wanting to stay at home, to lay down roots, to pay attention to your home life, to your family situation, and wanting to go out there and to make something of yourself, to focus on your career, your public status. People who have the North and South Node on these axes, they tend to move around a lot because the North and South Node, especially with the North Node in the fourth house, there's a tendency where big major changes and upheavals and redirections in life come through changes in your place of living, or changes in your career, with the 10th house being part of that as well. And usually they're tied together in some way. And even if they're not tied together like directly, you'll have both of those things in play at the same time. So like you'll have a change in location, and even if it doesn't change your career, like directly, you're going to also be experiencing career changes that are going on alongside of that. And so that's part of the energy. This is also an energy of moving around quite a bit because of that. And this is an energy where they say that you shouldn't live very close to your immediate like home environment and your family that you grew up with, like your parents. You should live at least 200 miles away. Otherwise, you're going to be completely, things are going to be continuing to go on that are beyond your control and that are a little bit more difficult. And also there's a need, especially with the North Node in the fourth house, to move into something new, right? To do things in a way that's different, and to lay down your own roots, right? To do things in your own way when it comes to your home, your property, your family. And you can get into this like karmic entrapment if you're too close to home, and if you're too I guess close in proximity to your family. So one of the things they do say is that, living farther away, and usually people, especially with the North Node in the fourth house, will live farther away from their where they grew up, their hometown and their family and all of that. Another thing too with the fourth and the 10th house, and I'm emphasizing this and the first and seventh because these are the angles, right? The angles in the chart are going to have more predominance. So the other thing with that is that it's a good way to merge these two energies, because there can be this like obsession with developing your career and making a name for yourself and starting your business and doing all these really career oriented things with the North Node in the 10th house, to the point where it's like it borders on obsession. And usually you do things in ways that are a little bit different. You have to do it kind of in your own way with the North Node in the 10th house, and it can make you a kind of an unpopular figure in your work environment sometimes, because you're doing things in ways that are unusual, and you're kind of overdoing it sometimes, and you're too passionate and too forthcoming, and you're just really all in it, and it can be upsetting to some people. And I've noticed that people who have this, they tend to have an unusual way of projecting their energy, unusual ideas, and they do tend to be very polarizing or disruptive. And so, they're not as popular as people who maybe have the South Node in the fourth house, which is more sticking to convention, or, your ego's taken out of it. It's not quite as obsessive of an energy. There are, different mitigating factors there. And so it can be problematic in that way. Whereas, the North Node in the fourth house can make you kind of like the black sheep of your family on the opposite end of that spectrum, where you're the weirdo doing things in a different way and not conforming to, your family's standards. And so it can go both ways. But the idea here is to merge these two energies, right? To create a good balance between being really obsessed with, going out into the world and starting your career and making a name for yourself, or whatever it is that you're doing out there. Or maybe you're afraid of it and you need to jump into it more, because that could be part of it too with the North Node. Or, jumping too far into your home and your family situation and wanting to just stay at home and retreat and keep yourself out of the limelight and not work out in the world. You have to kind of merge those two energies and find a balance between both. And then we have the North and South Node in the 5th and the 11th house. And, this is a little bit of a different energy. It's not as intense as it's going to be in the 1st and 7th or the 4th and 10th, but this does bring a lot of really fated occurrences involving children, involving friendships, involving romance, involving your passions, your hobbies, your interests, things that you love to do. And so you might have fated occurrences that happen in romantic situations that completely change your path in life. Or that completely change your interests in the things that you love to do, so you pursue something differently than you normally would have. This can also bring up a lot of really fated energy when it comes to your friends and your social networks. It can feel like with the South Node in the 11th house, everyone you come into contact with, all of your friendships, all of your social circles are containing people that are just weirdly familiar, and you have weird karma with, and like you're playing out that karma in this lifetime. And a lot of times friendships can be very volatile or just very subdued, and they just sort of fall away when they come to an end. And so it's like you're carrying out this karma with these groups of people, and once that's done, they just kind of disappear, and you never hear from them again, or it just doesn't you never connect again, right? So there's a lot of karmic implications when it comes to your friendships and your social circles on either side, if you have the North Node or the South Node in the 11th house. When you have the North Node in the 11th house, it can make it so you're maybe a little bit more disruptive or unpopular when it comes to your social circle, and it can cause issues with friendships earlier on, but later on you develop these skill sets and you learn how to rein it in a little bit, and so you can have really powerful, very karmic friendships that come in to lead you in a new path and a new direction. You're connecting with groups of people where it's like this fated connection that you're having here. This can also bring fated occurrences that are unexpected and not necessarily planned for, involving children, and involving children in general. That can be part of it too. So children can come in to completely change your path and completely throw you in a whole new direction with this energy too. And so that's like the 5th and the 11th house. If you have the North Node in the 5th, you're here to develop your passions a little bit more so, and to focus less about what other people think about what it is that you're doing. You might have some like weird things that you love to do, and your friends think that it's strange and you just don't care, right? So that could be your path. And if you have the North Node in the 11th house, maybe you are really obsessed with forming a group or connecting with groups of people or doing something that's for the greatest good of all concerned, but you go too hard and you overdo it and you're overbearing, and you have to kind of rein it back in. And, also incorporate your passions into that too, and your individuality, instead of focusing so much on what the group wants. And that's going to be part of that process. And then for the 6th and the 12th house, the North Node in the 6th and 12th house is an interesting one, and it's kind of a difficult one, especially if your North Node's in the 12th, because your direction and orientation in this lifetime is one more of solitude and seclusion. It's more of spiritual contemplation and creativity. It's one where you're going to be drawn out of the world in ways that are very fated, that sort of seclude you from other people. And you might feel really compelled to sort of hide away from the world and to leave normal day-to-day experience and day-to-day society. Like, you don't want to be out in the world doing work and focusing on these mundane things every single day. You want to be, doing the deep exploration, and you want to escape from day-to-day reality. This could also lead to obsession with, spirituality and these transcendent experiences where you're leaning more towards spiritual escapism or actual escapism through drugs and alcohol and things of that nature, either because it feels comfortable to you to do that instead of having to work so hard out in the world, which is something that's scary for you, or that you've never done before, or maybe you overdid it and then you burn yourself out and you have to go back to the 12th house. Or it could be that your North Node's in the 12th house and you feel obsessed with diving deeper and going into these like mysterious realms and these alternative realities, and that could be part of it too. And a lot of times there's karma that has to do with 12th house institutions that can come around. The 12th house represents, first off, one of the things it does represent, people say the 12th house is foreign countries. It's not just foreign countries. The 9th house is foreign countries. The 12th house is more like issues with foreign countries. And so you can have like issues that come up and arise through travel or through connections with foreign countries or foreign entities. The other things that the 12th house represent are these 12th house institutions. And these are structures and institutions that are intended to pull you out of normal society. And so those are things like hospitals, right, where you're secluded and you're in bed and you're, working on healing. These are places like mental hospitals and mental institutions. These are places like prisons. These are places like temples and monasteries and ashrams and spiritual retreat centers as well. So there's good and bad, it's the sacred and the profane in the 12th house. And so you can end up in these very karmic patterns or having these really strange experiences that change your life that have to do with these 12th house institutions. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the 6th house, it doesn't just represent work and your like day-to-day work experience, your relationships with coworkers. All of those can be volatile, especially up until that North and South Node maturation period. But it also represents your health, your nutrition, and your health and nutrition routines. And so, especially with the North Node in the 6th house, you might focus too much on that and not enough on your spiritual well-being and your inner world and what's going on with you energetically. You might be focusing a lot on just eating right and having the proper nutrition. You might go too hard, too fast, and overdo it to the point where you end up in the 12th house institution, right? Like a hospital or something like that. So you have to be careful in mitigating this energy and creating that balance. You can't go too hard in one area or the other, or it causes issues. And that's really where these axes come into play, and that's why I'm really highlighting that when I'm speaking about this right now, as opposed to going through each house individually, because it is on a spectrum with the North and South Node, and the goal ultimately is to have some sort of balance here. And and it can indicate, really life-changing occurrences that come through issues with health or issues with work, and issues with your daily habits and routines and all of that as well with the North or South Node in the 6th house. And so that's what's going on there. So I feel like we did a good job doing sort of a basic rundown and covering a lot of these topics pretty in depth when it comes to the North and South Node. If you have any experiences or questions that you want to share, feel free to comment down below, and please like this video if you enjoyed it. Share it with people if you feel like they can benefit from this information, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more tutorials like this. And I also do weekly forecasts every single week. And if you want to book a reading with me, of course you can always do that. The link to do so is down in the description of this video below. So thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. We're going to talk about eclipses in the birth chart. All right, bye.